this is a perfect opportunity for Europe to come together to take advantage of the gigantic economic advantage it has over Russia. And also, if we can get our act together, the combined militaries and industrial capacities of Europe will be more than enough to help Ukraine.
Vladimir Putin conceded almost nothing in his phone call with Donald Trump, but he did say he'd stop attacks on Ukrainian energy facilities. Ukraine says attacks on civilian infrastructure, including hospitals, continue. And Russia says Ukraine has hit one of its oil plants. So what, if anything, was achieved by the Trump-Putin phone call? Well, one woman who's been keeping us up to date, trying to pick through the mess of all of this over the last 2, 3, 4 weeks has been Catherine Philp, who's the Times' World Affairs editor. She joins us now. Morning, Catherine.
Morning, Stig.
This probably just merely revealed to us what we all thought, was that Putin isn't really serious about a ceasefire because he doesn't want to abandon his aim, which is to stop Western influence supporting Ukraine. That seems to be the key point he wants to maintain all along.
That's correct. And we don't actually know if that was even discussed in the phone call that they had yesterday. The Kremlin mentioned it in their readout of the call, but just said that it was raised and that it was a point that they wanted to make. But I think that, Putin here has just given enough to keep this process going, but nothing more than that. And, the fact that you got these two readouts from either side that bore almost no resemblance to one another shows you how far apart we still are.
And what's the next move in this? Because there's two theories about Donald Trump. One, he's a thin-skinned man who won't like to be slighted by Putin, and Putin may have slighted him by even showing up late to the meeting, and therefore he'll want to put loads of pressure on Russia to come properly to the table. Or ultimately, he's got no interest in Ukraine and he just wants any form of a deal that will allow him to get out of the situation entirely.
I think it's the latter, and that it will increasingly look like that. I mean, we know that Trump, when he's tried to undertake difficult negotiations before, has got incredibly frustrated, as he did with Kim Jong-un, and ended up walking out of it. He's got a lot more invested in this process. He's made a lot more noise about it. So I think he'll walk away far less willingly. He will need to keep at this. But it's very hard to see where it goes now, apart from these technical groups that both sides have said that they would set up. I think, though, that probably in that call, I mean, what we know of how Putin deals with Trump is that he won't behave in a way too directly to his face or down the phone line that appears that he's slighting him. I think he will continue to engage Trump. It's just at what point does Trump realize that this isn't really going anywhere? And
if the answer to that is America withdraws from the field, that becomes a big policy question for Europe, doesn't it? That ultimately, if the deal that Putin and Trump strike has some form of guarantee that the West will not support Ukraine, what does the rest of the West do who might want to support Ukraine?
I mean, it's an excellent question. And as you could see from that Kremlin readout, they were talking about the end of all military aid to Kyiv, not just American, so all Western. But obviously, that's not in Trump's gift. It would put Europe in an incredibly difficult situation if that were, Putin's end condition as well as his starting position. But I think, that's a position that Putin actively wants to put Europe and Europe's relationship with the US in. So, just as much as anything else in this conversation, Putin is aiming to split Europe away from the US. And so he's going to be looking for points at which he can put that crowbar between them and make things awkward and make the discussions between Washington and Europe awkward going forward.
There was an important line about Iran, which may be overlooked a little bit by people focusing on lots of other news that comes out of that meeting, or non-news, depending how you look at it. But the two leaders apparently agreed, this is, I think, from the White House readout, that Iran should never be in a position to destroy Israel. So that's the US and Russia joining forces against Iran. That feels like a significant shift.
I think all we really know is that was raised. I mean, even in the White House one, they said they agreed that. I mean, again, these are very easy things for Putin to say because he's not actively helping Iran to destroy Israel. Or at least not in an open sense. Yeah. So it's very easy just to make those statements. And I thought it was really interesting, actually, from the White House side, how much of that statement had nothing to do with Ukraine. It was about different matters, like that point about Iran. But also, we get an indication from it of what lures Putin is putting out, like the great economic deals that could be done. There was a lot of that language in there, and it shows you that Putin, there are other levers that Putin can press to make Trump think that there is something in it for him to continue this dialogue.
Yeah, it might be a deal between Russia and the US. It's got nothing to do with Ukraine at all when we get to the end of it all. Catherine, so interesting. We'll speak again, no doubt. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
That's Catherine Philp, the Times' World Affairs editor.
And as Catherine was mentioning there, a lot of those statements were not regarding strictly this. If you've not seen the front page of The Sun today, it's worth a look. The headline is "What the Puck?" and it relates to a conversation about sport, which formed part of that chat between Putin and Trump.
There'll be a US-Russia ice hockey match.
Yes, quite. Well, let's also bring in Lt General Ben Hodges, the former commander of the US Army in Europe. Good morning.
Good morning.
We were talking to Catherine Philp there about essentially what happens next. Do you think Donald Trump has been duped a bit by Putin here? One of our listeners has got in touch to say Sergei Lavrov has repeatedly denied Russian strikes on Ukraine's energy sector during talks with the US. So how can they refrain from something they claim they've not been doing? Is Putin pulling a fast one here?
Well, first, I have to say I agree with everything I just heard from Catherine. She really offered a good analysis to the audience. I don't know that they're pulling a fast one. It's just that this is what they do, and that unfortunately, our president seems to be vulnerable to this combination of flattery and the Russians saying just enough to indicate that they're interested, they want to participate, and that yes, of course, they have the same objectives, when in fact they have zero of the same objectives that that we in the West would want to have. I think Vladimir Putin has no desire to see a viable, sustainable Ukraine that is secure as long as he's alive. And they have not, throughout this entire process, they've never disavowed any of their longstanding objectives for Ukraine. So it's just unfortunate that the American side here, that we seem to be so vulnerable to this Russian approach. And of course, the key for me, or the key for your audience, is that UK, Ukraine, the rest of Europe are not bound by any of this because you're not active participants in this process.
Well, we're not bound by the outcome of it, but the reality is, as Catherine was saying there, it could force a very difficult confrontation between America and Europe if Europe refuses to cede to Putin's demands about intelligence and weapons support. Do you think that that's the realistic next step, that Europe will have to step up publicly to say they will continue supporting Ukraine?
Well, of course. I mean, if this deal goes the way that the Russians want it to go, then this will be an enormous security challenge and economic challenge for Europe. If Ukraine fails and Russia gets all that it wants, you're going to see millions more Ukrainian refugees heading west into Central and Western Europe. You're going to see the Russian army absorbing tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops and all their equipment. And then, of course, there will be no reconstruction of Ukraine, and so continued disruption of grain and energy shipments that will affect all of Europe. So, of course, it's in Europe's interest to not only make sure that Ukraine doesn't fail, but I think also this is a perfect opportunity for Europe to come together to take advantage of the gigantic economic advantage it has over Russia. And also, if we can get our act together, the combined militaries and industrial capacities of Europe will be more than enough to help Ukraine.
Finally, you have obviously direct experience of working with the militaries across Europe. At the moment, do you think that is logically possible? Is it feasible for Europe to come together in this way with what the countries currently have?
Well, of course, we are way below, when I say we, the West is below what it should have, given the ominous threats that we have seen for years and years, and yet a reluctance to acknowledge the threats coming from Russia and other adversaries. And so we have not taken the necessary steps to be ready. Having said that, here in Germany, I'm talking to you from Berlin this morning. Germany passed a crucial piece of legislation yesterday, historic actually, that will enable Germany to finally invest at a level that they should. You've got most of the nations on NATO's eastern flank, starting with Finland in the north, Poland, Romania, that have significant military capabilities. And of course, the Baltic allies, all three have, not only are they spending a lot, but they are actually doing a lot. France, Italy, Spain, all significant military. And of course, UK, while land forces are smaller than they should be, frankly, the quality is there. So it really boils down to, in my view, political will.
Lt General Ben Hodges, former commander of the US Army in Europe, many thanks for your time and perspective on this story.